Dragon Slayers, first of all, I am delighted to be joined today by an extraordinary woman, Linda Harper.
Hello, Tom. Good to see you.
Linda Harper. Linda Harper is a very heroic woman, and the story of her life is fascinating. And what is she doing in present time is that she's a novelist, having morphed from being a school teacher and a mother and a wife and I suppose an occasional gardener. She has recently published a novel. The novel is called Under the Fig Tree. Linda, first of all, tell us about your novel, and then let's go back and tell us about what became of that child that was once Linda and is now a full adult.
My novel was a long time coming, Tom. It actually started life as a short story. I was taking classes after my retirement to improve my writing skills, and I wrote a short story about this little old lady who was so disappointed in life. She was very old, she was ill, and she wanted to die, but she didn't want to die alone. So she went around the neighborhood looking for a cat to have in her room while she died. And that was kind of my inspiration. And I read the story to my classmates, and they just came unglued. They said, "You can't let her die without being known." And I said, "But that's the story. She does. She gets her cat and she goes to bed and she dies." And they just harassed me. And I began to think about that. And I thought, yeah, we all need to be known. We want to be known. So that was the beginning of the novel. I just thought about it a lot. And then I began to play with it and write. And my protagonist turned up. She's a young woman. Elizabeth Manley lives in the same town, and they come together through an odd set of circumstances. They connect with each other, and the old woman is a huge instrument in Elizabeth's healing and coming out from a life of secrecy and shame and fear. And it just goes from there. Lots of young people in it. It's cross generational in its approach to life because I really think that's how we best live, is when we have young and old combined together in community. So that's kind of the essence of it. There's lots of detail that I've left out.
So, one of the things that you and I share in common is that uh, we have self published. And to self publish takes a special kind of narcissism or determination. What I was challenged by was the whole notion of, do I really want to submit manuscripts to a number of publishers, or do I just really wish to launch my book? And in my sense, I wanted to get the book out to a select audience. So self publishing was a natural for me, which gives me an opportunity to give a shout out to our delightful publishers. Yes, Norman Adams and Sarah Roger, without which we would not be terribly effective. So, how did you get into self publishing?
I went the other route first in 2017 because I'd finished my novel then. I sent it to several publishing companies, and I got a series of rejections and decided I did not want to live my life being rejected, so I gave up. And then one afternoon, I was sitting at the computer. This was in September of 2023. I was sitting at the computer, and my niece had really urged me to publish this because she had read the manuscript. And I was just sitting there and I thought, I'll see what Amazon can do for me. So I clicked on Amazon Publishing. A window popped up with just very few questions. I had completed the information asked for in probably 5 minutes. And I hit send. Within 10 minutes, I had a phone call from Brian and inviting me to publish with Amazon. And from there, the ride began. It's been a great ride. I've loved it. I've enjoyed every minute of working with Sarah. She's an awesome team member, our team leader, and her team's just great. When they designed the cover for my book, which was early on in the process, I knew they get it. They understand my book. I love my cover. It's After two tries, they had the cover of my book designed, and it fit perfectly. It draws people in.
Well, as those of us who have experienced self publishing, I can assure you out there, we are not in it for the money. Uh, so, uh, the analogy I used last week when I was speaking with Linda, it's a bit like when we're little kids and we're just learning to watercolor, and we've got this watercolor project that we have to complete. We have to complete, and so ultimately we complete it, and we present it to somebody, and they say, "What a beautiful painting!" And that's the fulfillment we got. But I am curious because fortunately I've been able to speak to my audience about the impact of my book. You must have inspired a number of people. Have they communicated with you?
I actually my reach is around me. I've met with book groups around. Some of my friends had an awesome book launch for me, and about 75 people, including my family, were there at a local library in the town next door. Just so much fun, and I'm getting more. I'm being invited more to speak with small groups of people in book groups. I get to go to my hometown in Mississippi and for National Library Week and present my book there. So those are the kinds of things that give me joy. So it's worth the money, Tom. It's not about money. It's about the pleasure of sharing this piece of artwork, this watercolor that I've done. I love doing it. Yeah.
I think we were always aspiring for something better. Indeed, Dr. King spoke about the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution representing a promissory note for the future, which I think was really an elegant way of talking about our aspirations and where we're going. An imperfect country moving for greater and greater perfection, understanding that we've had some very challenging parts of our history, but we've also had some heroic transformations. And we were anchored in the belief that in God we trust. Uh, our Constitution, if you look at the derivatives of it, were founded on such documents as the Ten Commandments, the Magna Carta, and the philosophical works of people like Locke and John Stuart Mill. And to highlight John Stuart Mill in particular, he very much was concerned about what he referred to as the tyranny of the majority. He was very afraid of unchecked democracy, in that the majority could ultimately suppress and destroy the minority. And as a consequence, the founding fathers were very concerned about designing a system that would have some permanence. And hence, we are not a popular democracy, we're a republic, which has vetoes and constraints and all of that. And it's really nicely balanced. I think where things turned south rather precipitously was when the whole concept of hate speech came forward. That is, if you say something that challenges my belief system, it makes me uncomfortable, and that's hate speech. So as a consequence, we're not allowed to participate in dialogue. And I can tell you as a psychiatrist, and it will not make me terribly popular with some of my audience, but people need to be aware that much of the transgender movement is uninformed by research. There has been a lot of medical research about this, and what we are doing right now when we have 13-year-old girls who are undergoing double mastectomies and all of the surgical interventions on adolescent children is absolutely criminal. Because as a psychiatrist, when I witnessed what happened previously with transgender people, there was a displacement of the uncomfortable, the discomfort associated with all the adolescent agonies and depression and feelings of alienation to the question of, well, I'm not really who I am and I need to change my gender. In some instances, it's very real. But in many instances, it's really a false analysis of the problem, and we end up in tragedy. In the same sense, if we take somebody who says, because you are whatever, a black woman, a black man, a Latina, Latino, whatever, you are persecuted. Well, that may be true, but knowing that you've been victimized by your culture, you're not going to be able to sue the culture for all that victimization. You're ultimately going to have to say, how do I assert myself in this system in a way that I can really be a part of it? And I think increasingly when I speak with African American patients or Latino patients and Latina patients, they they get that concept. They understand. You don't want, if you're the mother of a child, you don't want the child to be perceived as a victim, so that rather than assert himself or herself, you decide that you're going to take reparations by stealing from supermarkets or something. That's hardly an end game. And
It's a matter of personal responsibility. If I want to be a productive, happy, content person in this world, I have to take personal responsibility for what I do and what I say and how I behave. And I think we've gone far away from.
well, if we look even at African American history and some of the most transformative figures, such as Frederick Douglass, uh, very thoughtful, articulate man who looked at this. Most recently, the work of Thurgood Marshall, which, by the way, there's a bit of irony that the product of Marshall's work, ultimately, the challenge of Brown versus Board of Education and all the work on civil rights, represented, interestingly, a collaboration of progressive Jewish attorneys and Thurgood Marshall. So that partnership was really essential for what's happened in our country, the successful transformation in our country. And I hope we can keep the dialogue going. I think, using Elton John's metaphor, the candle in the wind that got blown out was with the assassination of John F. Kennedy. I think of my generation, I can recall, you're a bit younger than me, but I couldn't vote for Kennedy, but I stood out in the rain as a student in Ann Arbor to listen to his Peace Corps speech at 2 a.m. in the morning. And that was so transformative for me. It changed my life. Gee, I wanted to do that. And so I became part of the Peace Corps. And it's that kind of.
I remember exactly where I was sitting when I heard of his assassination. I was in high school. I remember exactly where I was. I remember how I felt when that happened. It was a blow to our country. It truly, truly was.
Well, we've not. I don't think we've really recovered from that. I think we had with him a transformative leader. I think it was approximated by Barack Obama, but uh, President Obama had a different agenda. He was actually more focused on the world than he was necessarily on the country, and felt that in a way our country was too strong and was really an imperialistic entity that needed to be humbled. And obviously, articulate, very charismatic fellow, and I voted for him, but I was really disappointed by the outcome. And I think we've seen the residual of it that is disturbing me.
Well, we talk about people and Martin Luther King, of course. And in one of my book groups, that he came up, this lady, this white lady who's about my age, had actually been to one of his sermons when he was really getting things going for nonviolent change, and had met the man. And it was so awesome to talk to this lady who had met Dr. King and how impressive he was in person. Not only him, but his father, who this lady said, this large, rotund man came down the aisle after the speech was over with his arms wide open, and these three white women, the only white people in the whole place, he came towards them with his arms open, and she said, this was a day when a black man didn't touch a white woman without being in danger of his life, and just enveloped them in this big hug. That to me is such a metaphor of how we should live now, but we're so far from that. But I don't know if you remember James Meredith, Tom, who was the first. Yeah,
Of course, yes, yes. His first student at the University of Mississippi. Yeah.
Yeah, I've really gotten interested in his life because this my next book. I'm writing a sequel to Fig Tree, and it features a young black girl who was in this first story, and she's 20. She was 9 in the first story. She'll be 20 at that pivotal age where young people are trying to find out who they are, what direction they take. And James Meredith is going to be a figure in that story because he said very clearly, I am not trying to. I'm not fighting against civil rights. He said, I have every right that a white man has. I am standing up for what is mine. And I love that approach. Personal responsibility. I'm going to go and fight for this because I have a right as a human being to go to this school that I have chosen. And I just think it goes back again to that personal responsibility. I I'm going to do this. It may cost me, which it did. He was shot soon after and was in the hospital. But his statement, he still lives today. I've found out he still lives in Jackson, Mississippi. He hasn't relocated, but he says, I want to make every American a full-fledged American citizen, to have rights of every, and I just love that. It's kind of reminiscent of Desmond Tutu back in apartheid. And people like that who are willing to put themselves out there and say, this is what I'm trying to do. I'm not going to hurt anybody, but I'm going to go for it.
Well, one of the things I think that's been lost, and you and I were educated approximately at the same time, but
Yeah.
I recall in high school in particular, we took a course called civics. And what civics was about ultimately was the whole Greek idea of civitas, the responsibility of citizenship. And we looked upon citizenship as a right, an opportunity, and a responsibility. And I want to honor our citizens. I want us to grow into a country that has civil dialogue between citizens. And I think as we close today, I think we need to honor what I think was one of the last of the Kennedy generation politicians, and that's Senator Joseph Lieberman. Senator Lieberman was an extraordinary man. He was the product, the first a child of immigrant parents. His parents were Polish. They fled Poland in the 20s. Coincident, what a surprise, of anti-Semitism. And Joe Lieberman became, of course, a super achiever. Maybe coincidence to the grooming he got when he was bar mitzvahed, but he was valedictorian of his law school class, and he went on to a most distinguished political career. And he was, above all, the kind of leader that healed rather than divided. And that was what's special about him. He wanted to be in dialogue. He worked across the aisle. And sadly, I can recall the election where he was the vice presidential candidate to George Bush. He was competing, Al Gore. He was competing against George Bush and Dick Cheney. And I was remarking at the time that of the 4 politicians, by far, he was the best and the brightest. And he actually should have been the leader on some ticket. Interestingly, years later, before John McCain capitulated to Republican pressure, he was intending to choose Joe Lieberman rather than Sarah Palin as his vice presidential candidate. Yeah, he did not. He would have unlikely survived the challenge of the transformative candidate Barack Obama, but nonetheless, it certainly would have been a refreshing political dialogue.
We can only hope that we get back to that refreshing dialogue in our country. I don't know what it will take to get us there or if it's possible any longer.
Well, I see elements of hope. The elements of hope are as follows. Much of our information now is being transmitted through these kinds of experiences, podcasts, blogs, and so on. People are relying less and less on the traditional media. In fact, I don't even bother with it anymore. I read one newspaper and it really types me, and that's the Wall Street Journal. I find it fairly civil. And I love to search for my own carefully examined sources of information. And you learn a lot more than that way than you learn from safe speech, which is what
the nightly news. Yeah.
yes. Anyway, one last thing before we close, and I hope this is not our last interview. I would love to. Yeah, I would like to keep this going.
I would love to talk with you again. Yeah, I enjoy this.
Do you have any personal affirmations that guide you every day?
I wake up with gratitude, and I always say, "Thank you for good sleep, for a good night," to God. Thank you. Thank you for my life. I have another day. So I think as far as I have a lot of things around my house that remind me to be grateful, remind me who I am. So I look at those pictures or those. I have a little. I have a little vase of weeds that reminds me to be humble. There's beauty. There's beauty in the simple things in life. So I think I go for simplicity. Whatever is simple. I love nature. I love looking at naked trees, and I'm kind of grieving now because the leaves are coming on because there's such a beauty in things like that. As far as having a regular affirmation, I have had those in the past, but I just try to look at things that are simple with gratitude and be grateful. That gets me really far, just to look at whatever is in front of me, to be right in the moment of what's in front of me and just be grateful for it.
It's very interesting because when I work with my patients and develop a core group of, say, 3 to 7 affirmations, gratitude is always an anchor affirmation.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Linda,
As bad as things may seem, yeah, we can always find something to be grateful for.
the only major disappointment I have is that we're not geographically close to one another, because I could join you and your husband and break bed or something like that. You seem like a natural sister. You really are great. So
I would love to have a cup of coffee. That's my thing. Go have a cup of coffee somewhere. Yeah.
go have a cup of coffee. I think my lady would be delighted to meet you too. In fact,
I would love to meet her. Yeah. Yeah.
okay, no, she's a sweetheart. Anyway, I look forward to further dialogue, and be well, stay healthy, and keep inspiring us. All right?
Thank you, Tom. Awesome time meeting with you. Goodbye.